For decades, aircraft carriers were considered the ultimate answer to almost every military problem at sea. When tensions rose, a carrier strike group was deployed. When deterrence was needed, a carrier appeared offshore. When war broke out, carrier-based aircraft were often among the first to strike. Their size, firepower, and symbolic weight made them seem almost untouchable. Yet today, despite being more advanced and expensive than ever before, aircraft carriers are also becoming riskier to use than at any point in their history. This growing risk is not the result of a single weapon or a single adversary. It is the product of multiple overlapping changes in technology, strategy, and politics that have quietly transformed how naval warfare works. Aircraft carriers are still powerful, but the environment around them has changed faster than the concept itself. One of the most important changes is visibility. Aircraft carriers are no longer difficult to find. Advances in satellite imagery, radar, electronic intelligence, and unmanned systems have dramatically reduced the ability of large surface ships to operate unseen. In the past, the ocean provided concealment. Today, it often provides exposure. A carrier strike group generates heat, radar emissions, radio traffic, and aircraft activity that can be detected, tracked, and analyzed from great distances. Even when a carrier is not directly observed, its presence can often be inferred with high confidence. Visibility alone does not make a ship vulnerable, but it enables everything that comes after. Detection feeds targeting, targeting feeds weapons, and weapons feed strategic decisions. When an aircraft carrier can be tracked reliably, it becomes easier to plan how to avoid it, pressure it, or attack it. This fundamentally alters the balance between offense and defense. At the same time, the range of modern weapons has increased dramatically. Anti-ship missiles no longer need to be launched from nearby platforms. They can be fired from aircraft, ships, submarines, and even land-based launchers hundreds or thousands of miles away. Some are designed to maneuver unpredictably, complicating interception. Others rely on complex kill chains that integrate space-based sensors, airborne relays, and networked guidance. Even if these systems are imperfect, they force carriers to operate farther from contested areas, reducing their effectiveness. Distance imposes costs. Aircraft flying from carriers require more fuel, more refueling support, and more time to reach their targets. Sortie rates decline. Response times increase. The carrier remains relevant, but its influence is diluted. In a conflict where speed and tempo matter, that dilution can be decisive. Submarines add another layer of risk. Modern submarines are quieter, more capable, and harder to detect than ever before. They exploit one of the last truly opaque domains of warfare, the underwater environment. Even the possibility that a submarine might be present forces carrier groups to adopt more cautious behavior. Routes are constrained, speeds change, escorts are stretched thinner. A single submarine does not need to sink a carrier to achieve its objective. Simply forcing it to withdraw or limit its operations can alter the outcome of a conflict. The risk is not just physical, it is psychological and political. Aircraft carriers are no longer just military assets. They are national symbols. Each one represents tens of billions of dollars in investment, thousands of personnel, and decades of planning. The loss or severe damage of a carrier would have immediate global consequences, regardless of the broader military situation. It would dominate media coverage, shape public opinion, and place immense pressure on political leaders to respond. This reality affects how carriers are used. As the perceived cost of loss increases, tolerance for risk decreases. Decision-makers become more cautious. Deployments are more tightly controlled. Carriers may be kept farther from danger, not because commanders doubt their crews or capabilities, but because the political consequences of failure are too high. In this sense, the very value of aircraft carriers makes them harder to use decisively. Cost is another factor that contributes to risk. Modern aircraft carriers are extraordinarily expensive to build, maintain, and operate. While proponents argue that their long service lives justify the investment, high costs create strategic rigidity. When budgets are constrained, fewer carriers can be built. When fewer carriers exist, each one becomes more critical. When each one becomes more critical, the loss of any single ship becomes harder to accept. This creates a paradox. The more capable and expensive carriers become, the more cautious their use must be. Power becomes concentrated, and concentration creates vulnerability. Another emerging risk lies in the complexity of the systems aboard modern carriers. Advanced technology brings improved performance, but it also introduces new failure points. Integrated networks, automated systems, and advanced launch and recovery equipment require constant maintenance and highly specialized expertise. In contested environments where cyber attacks, electronic warfare, or physical damage are possible, complexity can become a liability. A system that fails gracefully is far less risky than one that fails unpredictably. The environment in which aircraft carriers operate has also become more crowded and politically sensitive. Many potential conflict zones lie near heavily populated coastlines, narrow seas, or contested maritime regions. Operating a carrier in these areas increases the risk of miscalculation, escalation, or unintended incidents. Even routine operations can be misinterpreted as aggressive actions, especially when tensions are already high. This is particularly relevant for the United States Navy, which relies on carriers not only for warfighting, but for presence and deterrence. Showing the flag can reassure allies, but it can also provoke rivals. In a highly transparent and media-driven environment, the movement of a carrier is rarely neutral. Every deployment sends a message, whether intended or not. The rise of distributed and asymmetric strategies further complicates the carrier's role. Rather than seeking direct confrontation, potential adversaries may focus on denying access, imposing costs, and exploiting weaknesses indirectly. Cyber operations, information warfare, economic pressure, and proxy forces can all be used to challenge carrier operations without triggering open conflict. In such scenarios, the carrier's strength may be less relevant than its vulnerability. These trends do not mean aircraft carriers are obsolete. Far from it. They remain unmatched in their ability to generate sustained air power at sea, coordinate complex operations, and project influence across vast distances. No other platform combines mobility, endurance, and flexibility in quite the same way. But their role is changing, and that change carries risk. Increasingly, carriers are being repositioned within broader systems, rather than standing at the center of them. Submarines, land-based aircraft, unmanned systems, and smaller surface combatants are taking on larger roles in contested environments. Carriers may operate farther back, supporting operations rather than leading them. They may arrive later in a conflict once risks have been reduced, or they may serve primarily as deterrent symbols rather than active combat platforms. This shift reflects realism. The assumption that aircraft carriers can always operate freely is no longer valid. The oceans are more transparent. The weapons are longer ranged. The consequences of loss are greater. Risk cannot be eliminated, only managed. The most dangerous risk, however, may be conceptual. Relying too heavily on aircraft carriers can create strategic blind spots. If planners assume carriers will always be available and effective, they may underinvest in alternatives or fail to prepare for scenarios where carriers are constrained. Recognizing risk is not a sign of weakness. It is a prerequisite for adaptation. In many ways, the growing risk faced by aircraft carriers is a measure of how important they still are. Adversaries focus on what matters most. The effort invested in detecting, tracking, and threatening carriers reflects their continued relevance. But relevance does not equal invulnerability. The future of naval warfare is likely to be defined by endurance, dispersion, and uncertainty, rather than decisive battles between capital ships. In that environment, platforms that are flexible, survivable, and difficult to target may matter more than those that are powerful but conspicuous. Aircraft carriers will continue to play a role in this future, but it will be a more constrained and carefully managed one. Their power remains immense, but the risks associated with their use are higher than ever. Understanding those risks is essential, not only for military planners, but for anyone seeking to understand how modern power is exercised at sea. Aircraft carriers are becoming riskier, not because they are weaker, but because the world around them has changed. The challenge is not to abandon them, but to use them wisely in an era where dominance can no longer be taken for granted.